Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. My name is Craig Lees, President of the BVA and Chair of Choice for Voice 2021. I'm joining you again today to introduce the second of our esteemed keynote speakers, who is, of course, Professor Kenneth Bozeman. Professor Bozeman is a frequent and in-demand speaker at international voice science conferences and universities worldwide. He has written several articles on the topic of acoustic vocal pedagogy and is the author of 2 books, Practical Vocal Acoustics and Kinesthetic Voice Pedagogy. In 1994, he was awarded the Voice Foundation Van Lawrence Fellowship for his interest in voice science and pedagogy. An emeritus professor of music, he was the chair of the voice department at Lawrence University, where he received 2 awards for excellence in teaching. He's also the chair of the editorial board for the Nats Journal of Singing, and in 2019 was inducted into the prestigious American Academy of Teachers of Singing. If you have any questions throughout today's presentation, please submit them using the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. These will then be collated in preparation for a 15-minute Q&A section at the end of the lecture. So presenting today on motivating acoustic efficiency, it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Kenneth Bozeman.
Thank you, Craig. It's a great honor to be given the opportunity to speak to the British Voice Association, one for which I'm both grateful and humbled, if not a bit daunted. I will do my best to make good use of your members' time and attention. Before I get to the matters of voice acoustics, I trust you will indulge my need to provide a more global context for why we do what we do. The Edgar Harbour was the lyricist for the song Somewhere Over the Rainbow, one of the most popular songs of the 20th century stateside. He made the following observations. Music makes you feel feelings. Lyrics make you think thoughts. Songs make you feel thoughts. I believe it's reasonable to adapt his insights to our goals as habilitators and rehabilitators of voice. We humans have thoughts, and we have feelings about those thoughts. Our voices express both our thoughts and their attendant feelings. So my adaptation would be this. Our expressive inflection, our prosody, makes you feel feelings. Our words make you think thoughts. Our voices, in speech and song, make you feel thoughts. Alfred Wolfsohn was a stretcher bearer in World War I who was haunted by the sounds he heard of wounded and dying soldiers. His disciple Roy Hart summarized Wolfsohn's conviction with the following metaphor. Voice is the muscle of the soul. A couple of millennia earlier, Aristotle defined voice as a sound caused by the soul by the repercussions of the air made in the throat with the intention of signifying something. The dancer La Marie maintained that the only reason for mastering technique is to make sure that the body does not prevent the soul from expressing itself. Excuse me. Voice occurs in response to the soul's impulse to express feelings. We do this to induce empathy, to get others to feel what we are feeling, and they respond to us similarly to get us to feel what they are feeling. Inducing and feeling empathy is the very basis of a caring community and ultimately of civilized society. We who work with voice are in the business of helping souls express themselves more fully, one soul at a time, in order to connect with other souls. It's important work. My objectives for today for the acoustics are to present the case for acoustic registers. Also to present the practical implications of Ian Howell's great work on spectral tone color and auditory roughness, and then to explain the necessary migrations of timbre and somatosense, the body's sensations, across range. And finally, to offer some implications for habilitation strategies. First, let's do an overview of the acoustic landscape that all singers inhabit. There is a voice source. The vibrating vocal folds convert tracheal airflow into a complex pressure waveform, which, if clean, meaning noiseless, the brain decodes as a set of harmonic frequencies. The vocal tract filters that input. It has natural resonances that both respond to and reshape the acoustic energy introduced by the voice source. This reshaped sound wave is both reflected back to the source, affecting its behavior, and radiated from the mouth, containing spectral peaks that we call formants. So we have source harmonics, source-generated harmonics, interacting with vocal tract resonances, and radiated in a sound that contains spectral peaks or formants. Moving to the question of vocal registers, how have vocal registers been defined? Historically, a vocal register was defined by Garcia as a series of consecutive homogeneous sounds produced by one mechanism, differing essentially from another series of sounds equally homogeneous produced by another mechanism. In the last century, Holleen, Brown, and Weiss defined a vocal register as a portion of the frequency range within the human voice that is of similar quality and is due to similar vocal fold activity throughout that range. They result from variations in the thickness, length, and mass of the vocal folds. And then one more, Cornelius Reed defined a vocal register as a balance of tension distributed between the two intrinsic muscle systems of the larynx, which he identified as the arytenoid systems and the cricoarytenoid systems. So the problem is this. There are two essentials that define a vocal register: timbral coherence, or sameness, the homogeneity we referred to, and a distinct causal mechanism. Perception of a vocal register change requires a clearly noticeable change of timbre. This assumes that a change of mechanism causes a change of timbre. An additional assumption has historically, with few exceptions, been that the mechanisms of change are entirely laryngeal, or voice source, as the Holleen definition stated. This raises the following questions. What is timbre? Of what is timbre composed? What is required acoustically to change timbre? And what mechanisms can meet those requirements? Timbre, broadly seen, is how the human brain processes aspects of sound other than pitch and overall intensity. It's primarily composed of the spectral tone colors and relative intensities of the frequencies inherent in the radiated complex waveform, plus the relative auditory roughness percept, the buzziness of the radiated sound. More later on both of those. Possible mechanisms of timbral change are the voice source, by changes in the pitch or spectral slope of the glottal waveform, again more later on that, or the resonator, changes in which specific frequencies are being featured by the resonator. Ian Howell, my colleague from the New England Conservatory, has brought over from the field of psychoacoustics some very valuable concepts, and he's elaborated further on them as they apply in vocal pedagogy. Psychoacoustics is how the ear and brain experience and process sound. He brought over the concepts of absolute spectral tone color, and that's actually his designation for this concept, and the concept of auditory roughness, which was already quite present in psychoacoustics field. So absolute spectral tone color works like this. Humans perceive light frequencies as a spectrum of colors. That's how our brain processes light frequencies. It turns out we perceive sound frequencies as a spectrum of tone colors. The individual harmonics encoded in the glottal wave form each have an absolute spectral tone color to human perception. That is an inherent frequency-dependent, meaning it changes by frequency, vowel-like tone color, relative height, higher or lower, and relative brightness, darker or brighter. The tone colors of those frequencies that are most strongly resonated and radiated from the mouth will therefore dominate the timbre and determine the vowel of the resultant sound that we hear. Here is a chart of the spectral tone colors per frequency. These are representing sine tones, single frequencies, not complex tones with harmonics. So individual frequencies, individual sine tones below C5, which is this C here, sound low, dark, and oo-like. Above C7, which is the top octave of the piano, sound high, bright, and E-like. And in between, they're moderate to bright and like other vowel colors. It's actually very easy to learn this chart. Oo up to C5. The next octave, the C5 to C6 octave, is O, aw. And then the C6 octave is warm ah, I, up to A. And then the C7 octave, the top octave of the piano, is basically the E tone color octave. Well, most sounds in nature are not sine tones, or rather complex waves comprised of a blend of many frequencies. Therefore, they result in a composite blend of many tone color components. It's like when you buy paint and you mix a paint for a color, you start with some neutral and you add in various other color contributions, you mix it up together, and you get your final color that you paint with. What are some of the implications of absolute spectral tone color? A sung tone is composed of a blend of the tone colors of the harmonics of the pitch being sung. So the sung pitch determines the available tone color options because the sung pitch has a fixed set of harmonics which form the paint palette for that pitch. The harmonic spread of higher sung pitches offers a smaller paint set with fewer color options. If you remember your harmonic series, there's an octave between the first and second harmonic that's skipping a lot of frequencies and a lot of tone colors, right? And then there's a fifth between the second and third harmonic and so forth. The resonator determines how much of each color is used by selecting which harmonics to feature in the radiated sound. Auditory roughness works like this. The first 5 harmonics of the voice source signal resolve to human hearing into a pure, smooth pitch percept. If the voice source signal contains more than 5 harmonics, starting with the 6th, an auditory roughness or buzziness factor arises in human perception. Harmonics that are closer than a third together, and increasingly higher ones get closer and closer, beat against each other to our perception and introduce a buzziness. Harmonics greater than the 8th harmonic, which is 3 octaves up, are especially buzzy and begin to separate from our perception of pitch altogether as just a ringing quality that persists. the more higher numbered, closely clustered harmonics there are, that is 2.5 to 3 octaves above the sung pitch, that are within hearing range, our hearing range is most sensitive in the top octave of the piano, that are being sufficiently resonated and radiated, the more auditory roughness or buzziness there will be in the sound percept. What are the implications of auditory roughness? Well, these conditions occur, all those that I just listed, with greater or deeper vocal fold contact in each vibratory cycle and longer duration or closure in each vibratory cycle. More at lower sung pitches, which have more high, closely clustered harmonics within our hearing range. More in open timbre than in close timbre, defined later. More at higher intensities, because higher intensities boost the higher harmonics more than the lower harmonics. This means that basses are buzzier than sopranos. Well, we knew that, right? Chest voice is buzzier than head voice because it meets all of those conditions, or many of those conditions. Open timbre, voce aperta, is buzzier than closed timbre, voce chiusa, which is buzzier than whoop timbre. And loud sounds are buzzier than quiet sounds. Furthermore, auditory roughness, buzziness, is perceptually associated with laryngeal registers, such that buzzier is perceived as chestier, whether or not the laryngeal adjustment is in mode 1. Smoother is perceived as being headier, whether or not the laryngeal adjustment is in that ligament, that thin ligament mode 2 adjustment. Sizzle, which is a sort of an intermediate level of buzz, is perceived as mix or close timbre. So what does the voice source, the larynx, contribute to timbre? Well, it contributes the pitch with its harmonic set of spectral tone colors, so that pitch determines your paint set. That comes from the voice source. It determines the relative cleanness of the signal, the harmonic to noise ratio, which is determined by the efficiency of the vocal fold closure. If you have efficient vocal fold closure, you tend to have a clean signal without much noise, if any, in the signal, no aperiodicity, all periodic harmonic content. It contributes the laryngeal register via the closed quotient or the contact quotient, such that you have chest voice with some muscle vibration, or mode 1, head voice, which is a thin stretched ligament vibration, or mode 2. And it contributes, along with the respiratory system coordinated with it, the phonation mode. Is it breathy, having some noise, pressed, with too much glottal resistance, or flow, which is a lovely balance of pressure, literally transglottal pressure difference, airflow, and glottal resistance. All of those result in a spectral slope, which is the rate at which higher harmonics above the fundamental frequency weaken in intensity. That is, the number of harmonics that are present and their relative intensity as they fall off in intensity from the fundamental frequency. A steep slope, as in head voice or mode 2, falls off very rapidly and has mostly lower end harmonic content, so lower end spectral tone color. A shallow slope, as in mode 1 or chest voice, has a lot of high harmonics, so it has more high timbred spectral content. Assuming a clean source signal, the voice source of the larynx really only determines pitch and spectral slope, because spectral slope includes laryngeal register, phonation mode, and so forth. Some spectral slope examples visually are here. Spectral slope is measured in negative decibels per octave in terms of the drop-off. Here is a very shallow spectral slope at a negative 3 decibels per octave, with the fundamental frequency being the strongest, the next octave being 3 decibels lower, the 4th harmonic, which is the 2nd octave up, 3 decibels lower, the 8th harmonic, which is the next octave higher. So 3 decibels per octave creates this shallow spectral slope. A lot of high harmonics. This will be a fairly bright timbred source. Here is a steep spectral slope, same strength of fundamental, a 12 decibel drop to the first octave, another 12 decibel to the fourth harmonic, the second octave, and so forth. This would be a very warm, low spectral content source vibration. What are the effects of spectral slope on timbre? Well, changes in the steepness of the spectral slope, as I just mentioned, affect the relative brightness and also the potential auditory roughness. If you have a steep spectral slope, duller and very little, if any, auditory roughness. Shallow spectral slope, brighter with a lot of high clustered harmonics that could create auditory roughness. And the relative proportion of something I call the over and under vowel contributions. Over vowel contributions come from higher in the spectrum. Under vowel contributions come from lower in the spectrum, so the spectral slope will affect how much raw material you have for creating those. More later on that. And if there is an abrupt binary shift of spectral slope, as does happen in a yodel or a flip or a voice break, you will hear that and recognize that as a laryngeal register change. Chest voice, shallow slope, if there's an abrupt shift to a falsetto or a head voice, steep spectral slope, you will hear that shift in brightness as a laryngeal register change. This only happens once, if at all, across a voice's primary range, this possible abrupt shift of spectral slope. Most singing techniques train to minimize or eliminate such binary shifts as flipping or yodeling, seeking instead a smooth, gradual steepening of spectral slope across range so that there's no sudden binary shift. The more successful they are at that objective of smoothing the change of spectral slope across range, the less the voice source will contribute to any timbral shift decisive enough to be perceived as a change of vocal register. You need to process that. The more successful a technique is in smoothing the binary shift of spectral slope across range, the primary one from chest to head, the less the voice source will be contributing to a timbral shift decisive enough to be perceived as a change of vocal register. What the voice source cannot do is feature individual harmonics within the spectral slope. It can only affect the angle of the spectral slope, not feature individual harmonics and change the relative intensity of individual harmonics within the spectral slope. So what does the filter or the resonator contribute to timbre? Well, it creates formants, which are resonance-featured frequency peaks. It creates the vowel formants, the first and second formants, the lowest two resonance-featured frequency peaks, which contribute an under and over vowel tone color contribution each. It creates the singer's formant cluster, which is a clustering together of the formants 3, 4, and 5, which is in the top octave of the piano, which adds a ringing, possibly buzzy, auditorially rough, E-like tone color. And there are higher formants above the singer's formant cluster, depending on the genre. And it determines acoustic register locations by determining the pitch locations of the first resonance of the vocal tract per vowel. Those change from vowel to vowel, but wherever that first resonance location is, that will determine acoustic register locations for that vowel. Because the relationship of source harmonics to the first resonance of the vocal tract determines acoustic register. Every time a harmonic, if this is a set of harmonics with my fingers here, crosses the first resonance, there is an audible timbral change that you can hear and possibly interpret as a change of vocal register. Both the source and the resonator contributes to the degree of auditory roughness, how buzzy or smooth. They do this because the source provides the number of harmonics by the spectral slope, and the filter determines which ones to resonate. If it resonates enough higher harmonics, you get this auditory roughness or buzziness. What are the implications of all of this? Well, there is only one clear binary laryngeal shift in the vocal range, the shift from mode 1 to mode 2, chest to head. This has been measured by EGG, where you can see where the thickness of the contact quotient goes from somewhat thick to a thin ligament vibration. That change tends to overlap with the change of acoustic register from open timbre to close timbre of the open vowels, a transition, an acoustic transition, which amplifies a change in auditory roughness. So the change in auditory roughness from chest to head, which happens typically just below, at the bottom of and just below the treble clef, is at the same location as the change from open to close timbre of the open vowels. So those two things together amplify a change in auditory roughness that can be perceived. Which one is dominating your perception of a change of vocal register? Is it the laryngeal shift or is it the acoustic register change? That's actually a legitimate question. A well-trained voice has minimized or eliminated the laryngeal shift, that is the shift of spectral slope. So its change in spectral slope has been rendered so gradual as to be almost imperceptible, depending on the success of that technical training. Other changes of timbre, both there and particularly elsewhere in the range, require changes in the intensities of individual harmonic tone colors, something the source can't do, and therefore are due either to changes of pitch. Whenever you change the pitch, you're actually changing your paint set, your set of harmonics, or changes of vowel. The filter can select different harmonics to feature, and it does that to create different vowels. Or, relevant to this topic, changes of acoustic register, changes in the harmonics relationship to that first resonance of the vocal tract. Not to changes of laryngeal register, that is, not to changes in the source spectral slope. Let's review quickly the acoustic registers as I've presented them. This is a chart of first formant or first resonance locations of this set of cardinal vowels, E, A, E, A, O, U, and then charted below are pitches at which, if you were singing those pitches, a harmonic from the source would be interacting with this first resonance location of the given vowel. This is a chart roughly for a tenor or a mezzo. If your sung pitch matches the first resonance or a first formant vowel box, you are then in whoop timbre, because the first resonance is resonating your fundamental frequency, roughly the equivalent of the pitch you're singing, and really boosting that. Since it's in the treble clef, it's going to be an oo or an o-like timbre, so it's creating a very full, round, warm, dark color contribution to the sound. If you want to sing in whoop timbre above these formant boxes, you need to open the vowel to raise the resonance in tandem with that fundamental frequency. Close timbre would be any sung pitches between the black pitches and the formant boxes. There's about an octave of close timbre. When you're in close timbre, you have only one harmonic below the first resonance of the vocal tract. So you have one harmonic, the fundamental frequency, below the first resonance, and your second harmonic is now above that first resonance, whatever vowel you're singing. Do notice how acoustic registers vary in location significantly from vowel to vowel. Open timbre would be all sung pitches at or below the black pitches. So any pitch you sing below these black pitches of a given vowel will be an open timbre for that vowel, which means it will have two harmonics or more equal to or below the first resonance of the vocal tract. And then any pitches lower than these other color pitches have even more harmonics below the first resonance of the vocal tract. The more harmonics you have below the first resonance, the more open the timbre will sound. Typically, the buzzier the auditory roughness will be as well. Here is a MODA demonstration of acoustic registers. I explain that I will not be changing the shape of the vocal tract nor the spectral slope of the input of this, so every change that you hear will be from acoustic relationships. The voice source spectral slope is set as if in chest voice and flow phonation for this entire demonstration. The vocal tract shape will be unchanged as well. Therefore, any timbral shifts you hear that might signal a change of register will be due exclusively to acoustic relationships. Note the change of timbre when any source harmonic rises above the first resonance of this ah vowel. You will notice an increase in the undervowel tone color, especially at the change from open to closed timbre when the second harmonic rises above the first resonance. Then the timbre will continue to close and smooth as the voice ascends into whoop timbre. Though the source spectral slope remains characteristic of chest voice, the timbre will seem to be that of head voice. Let me play some of that again so that you can hear those. So all of those timbral shifts you heard were due to relationships of source harmonics with the first resonance of the vocal tract. What are the implications of this? The laryngeal voice source is the essential sine qua non, the without which not, of voice production. It's utterly important, of course. Its job is to provide a balanced flow phonation and appropriate spectral slope per aesthetic and intensity target across range. Of course, various genres will play with those factors, but that's basically its job, and particularly in classical, that's its job. However, since register change, by definition, requires timbral change, and timbral change usually requires changes in the relative intensities of individual harmonics, something the voice source cannot do. In a well-modulated voice, meaning where you've smoothed out that shift of spectral slope, the larynx is not the primary source of perceived register changes. Perceptual changes of vocal register are rather due to changes of acoustic relationships, acoustic registers, more than to the admittedly essential yet gradual changes of laryngeal function and spectral slope. Acoustic registers are real. Moving on, my colleague Chadley Ballantyne has brought over from hearing research the concept of palæsthesia, or vibrotactile perception. That is our sensation of vibration. We sense it through something called Pacinian corpuscles, which are corpuscles that surround nerve endings. When those corpuscles are deformed by pressure variations, vibration, they activate signals to the brain. It turns out that our sensation of vibration is strongest near middle C, roughly 250 to 300 hertz, and is relatively strong throughout the treble clef, but diminishes above the treble clef rather rapidly and disappears altogether by C6, roughly 1,000 hertz, soprano high C. This means that whatever vibration we are feeling with our sung sounds is from frequencies below 1,000 hertz. Most likely, frequencies being resonated by the first resonance and radiated as the first formant, most of which lie below about 800 hertz. Rarely from the second resonance in the second formant, as was previously thought. I thought this, I think most of us thought this, and certainly not from the singer's formant cluster, though we have very strong perceptions that we're feeling that ringing part of our sound. What we are probably feeling are its effects on lower parts of the spectrum, not literally those high frequencies. We may be feeling other associated sensations, pressure, shaping, effort, which hopefully we don't feel too much of. Ideally, and this is the take-home message, the higher we sing above circa C5, the less we should be feeling. If you're singing above C5, your second harmonic is already out of vibrotactile sensory range. You're just feeling your fundamental frequency in terms of vibration. There are other sensations, but in terms of vibration. So the higher you sing, the less you should feel. That's useful information. Let's review vocal tract resonances a bit. The overall shape of the vocal tract results in its sound transfer characteristics. Those are the characteristic way in which it transfers sound from the glottis to the outside world. Its main characteristic is the presence of natural resonances, which are peak frequency responses, wavelengths to which it is more responsive. Those wavelengths reflect internally, they echo back and forth, to build up strong standing waves, which are then emitted as formants, which are radiated spectral peaks. It has three main resonance areas: the first resonance, which leads to the first formant, the second resonance, which leads to the radiated second formant, and a clustering of formants 3 through 5, leading to the singer's formant cluster. Vowels are created by the tone colors of the harmonics being featured by the first two resonances of the vocal tract, and radiated as the first two formants. The first formant contributes a lower, warmer undervowel tone color. It lies roughly between D4 and G5 in contact with the treble clef. That is the absolute spectral tone color range of oo, o, and a little bit of aw at G5. Oo goes all the way up to C5, if you recall. In a given voice, that first formant spans about 1 octave. The second formant contributes a higher, brighter, overvowel tone color. It lives roughly from about G5, top of the treble clef, up into the top octave of the piano, D7. That's the absolute spectral tone color of I, and it spans about 1/10 in a given voice. You might be able to hear it as I whisper a series of vowels. That's 1/10. One of these formants will be carrying the principal tone color of the intended vowel. The other formant is offering a complementary balancing tone color. The intended vowel tone color is usually carried by the overvowel, but not always, and the complementary color by the undervowel. The higher singer's formant cluster, which lives between about D7 and A7 in the top octave of the piano, is adding a ringing, buzzing, or sizzling E-like timbre. The take-home message from this is that a single vowel, in this simplified model, is made up of at least two vowel-like tone colors. an intended target tone color which dominates your shaping, and a complementary modifying tone color which is often passively present. Singers and speakers can learn to sense and attend to these two tone color components, play with and vary their percentages for best effect. The intended target vowel is the featured color and dominates our shaping. However, having sufficient complementary vowel tone color facilitates functional efficiency. Here is a chart of approximate perceptual spectral tone colors of the first two formants of the vocal tract, as the first two radiated as the first two vowel formants. This would be the under and over vowel tone colors. The intended vowel I have listed across the bottom here underneath, the intended vowel of E, A, O, U. The vowels E through A get their intended target tone color from the over vowel, from the second formant contribution. They're color-coded in red to show where they get their intended target tone color. U and O, the spectral tone color for U and O is lower down within the treble clef, so they get their target tone color from the under vowel, from the first formant, coded in blue. The green show you the perceptual tone colors of the complementary vowel percept. Now, literally, the under vowel is all oo. However, if it is a complementary tone color, we tend to hear that complementary color blended with the target color. So we hear an E and an E. We hear an ah blended with an If I do an ah, and thump my throat with my glottis closed, you hear the dominant color of that under vowel ah. So we hear the complementary vowel color somewhat blended with the target vowel color. If you hear spectrally, like harmonic singers hear, where you hear individual harmonics rather than your brain blending them together, you would hear U and E for an E vowel, and so forth. It's useful to know what the two tone colors are that your brain is likely to perceive if you're hearing linguistically like most of us do. There is a bright-dark orientation conundrum. It is universal, as far as I can tell, a universal innate percept that bright is forward and dark is back. This perhaps comes from our yawn instinct and our yell instinct. That percept causes a binary dilemma, an either-or dilemma. I can either make it forward and bright or dark and back, and I can't get this really robust chiaroscuro timbral balance that, for example, I want in classical sound. Chiaroscuro is dark-bright, a strong dark-bright balance of timbre. So it leads me to an either mouthy, shallow, bright E-A-A, or a false, dark, swallowed, hollow E-A-A, rather, or a middling average, rather than a maximizing of both. For a balanced, maximized chiaroscuro classical timbre, I recommend that you reverse this innate conception and perception. Conceive of the over vowel, the second formant, the higher, brighter one, as pharyngeal in the vertical back room. E, A, A, E, as opposed to E, A, A, E, A, A. And the warmer under vowel as passively oral in the front room or higher than E, A, E, A, A. So it's bright E in the back, warm E to the front. E, A, A, as opposed to E, E, the instinctive. The undervowel color, if complementary, is unshaped, high, and rather forward. In other words, it's passively present. If it's complementary, in the case of the O and the U, the undervowel is not complementary. It is the target vowel, and you will lip round to create the O and the U. This percept reversal of bright in the back and warm to the front passively facilitates maximizing both aspects of chiaroscuro, I can have maximal brilliance and maximal depth in my production if I reverse that percept. For speech like CCM styles, popular culture's music, you can continue to think of the overvowel. The overvowel should dominate the timbre to sound more speech-like all the way up as much as possible. And you can continue to think of that overvowel as high and above the palate, nasopharyngeally and forward from there. But still having some pharyngeal, nasopharyngeal, will tend to keep your transglottal pressure difference more comfortable than just going totally too far to the front with that overvowel concept. Along the lines of this, I want to talk about the oropharyngeal sensation. A typical response to our innate acoustic perception of dark in the back is our desire for a certain amount of timbral depth invites a yawn response to open the throat. This is a false kinesthesia. When you do the yawn, it lifts the palate and lowers the larynx, but it pulls the tongue back into the laryngopharynx, narrowing the throat. And it yields an oropharyngeal, the oral pharynx behind the mouth, percept that feels distended, dark, and acoustically hollow. That kind of yawny sensation, and it feels like the entire tone is limited to that area. I recommend that you do the opposite of the yawn sensation. Not muscular constriction, rather use affect, expression, to induce an acoustically concentrated, ringing oropharyngeal percept. E, A, E. It will be an under-articulated balance of target and complementary vowel colors. By the way, the other innate percept tends to invite over-articulation of vowel change. E, A, more the same. It feels very centralized, concentrated just behind the tongue dorsum, which is not that far back. It's in front of your ears, with a fronted back wall percept. When you yawn, it feels like your throat wall is way behind your ears, which is false. It's in front of your ears. You want a comfortably short front to back percept of that distance. This stabilizes the pharyngeal shape and poise, enabling passive migrations through the same shape across acoustic and laryngeal register changes. And paradoxically, that concentration of the oropharynx enables sensation above and below it, a more vertical, tall sensation behind, rather than the yawn, which tends to restrict the sensation to that yawn area. There are two main types of vowel migration: passive vowel migration and active vowel modification. In both types, the timbre of the vowel typically migrates toward the vowel's complementary tone color across range. Passive vowel migration is this. It's a change of pitch with no change of vocal tract shape. When you change the pitch, vowel color will migrate with every pitch change. That's because every pitch change involves a change of your paint set, your paint palette, right? Your set of harmonics moves with every pitch. The harmonics feature change as they move through resonances, especially when a source harmonic passes through the first resonance. You really notice a migration of timbre. When do we use passive vowel migration? Well, we use it in classical land. You can use it for all sung pitches below and up to a vowel's first resonance and first formant. In other words, you allow all of those acoustic register shifts up to whoop timbre without necessarily tracking any of those harmonics with that first resonance. Once you get to whoop timbre, you're going to start tracking that fundamental frequency with the first resonance. What does passive migration require? It requires allowing migrations, changes of sensation, vowel, tone color, rather than trying to hold on to the same sensation and the same tone color as you ascend. You have to allow things to migrate. So you have to find some dynamic, safe means, flexible means of maintaining shape. so that you don't induce any kind of rigidity into the system. I suggest using sincere affective inflection. My mantra for this is suggest the vowel and insist on the affect. So suggest an intended vowel to yourself, but insist on the affective, expressive, inflective journey. Oh, 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 ah, ah, rather than chasing the speech level color of the vowel up the range. Active vowel modification is a change of shape. You're actively shape changing, with or without a change of pitch, and it will alter the sound. It's used mostly for pitches above a vowel's normal first resonance, first formant location, usually to track whoop timbre. Once your sung pitch matches your first resonance, if you sing above that resonance and do not actively modify, there will be nothing to resonate your fundamental frequency. You'll be left only with resonation of higher frequencies, so your sound will thin very rapidly. So you want to raise the first resonance with active shape change to track that fundamental frequency. You raise the first resonance in tandem with the sung pitch to track whoop timbre. Sometimes we do active vowel modification to avoid whoop timbre. This is what non-treble voices like basses, baritones, and tenors do. If they don't want their E or their OO vowel to be in whoop timbre, right where on the same pitch where their ah vowel is in a robust close timbre or even an open timbre. So as that fundamental frequency approaches the first resonance, they will raise the first resonance to keep it above the fundamental frequency to avoid moving into whoop timbre. More fancy active vowel modification is used to retune the second resonance to a higher harmonic for a brighter timbre. This is used in treble middle voice to strengthen used primarily in the lower half of the treble clef to strengthen treble middle voice, for non-treble operatic top in that part of the range, or for belting. How is it done? It depends on the genre. There is often some degree of vowel opening, but it can involve vowel closing. In Western classical timbre, we do it without tube shortening generally. We want to maintain, for most of the range, a relatively similar tube length so that our timbre matches top to bottom. It usually involves an increase in the complementary vowel tone color. As you do those modifications, you will hear more and more complementary vowel tone color. Ideally, we want it to appear natural or speech-like, and we want it to retain vowel identity as high as possible for intelligibility. We want our words to be understood insofar as that's possible. It's best motivated, again, by sincere expressive affect, the way we motivate voice in the wild to express feelings. The challenge is to know which one to use when, whether to use active vowel modification or to simply allow or facilitate passive migration. Problems arise from using the wrong one for the situation, or ending up with odd vowel distortions. We don't want that. We want whatever migrations there are to sound like they're in the right family of migrations. They belong to the same family of vowel sounds and not odd distortions. Or a possible timbral imbalance. If you don't do it well, you won't have a nice balance of depth and clarity. You can develop kinesthetic and oral awareness of the two vowel components using various strategies. This is skilled singing. Any noise with sufficiently broad spectral content, meaning with frequency content from at least 200 hertz up to 5,000 hertz, that is introduced into the vocal tract, will fully populate the resonant structure of the vocal tract and reveal its resonant structure or its sound transfer characteristics in the sound that is radiated. Some people have used vocal fry for this. An expressive chiaroscuro whisper which is a whisper with an atypically settled larynx with lower spectral content, can provide just such a noise source. Typical whispering features high content and usually a raised larynx and a narrowed pharynx. Counterscrotal whisper uses a settled, relaxed to neutral larynx and has a lower balanced spectral content, not just high spectral content. This device can be used to increase kinesthetic and oral awareness of the tone color contributions of the first two formants, to vary their tunings and percentages for best effect in the resultant composite sound. You can rehearse both passive migrations and active modifications with the counterscrotal whisper. And you can also begin to hear a duet between these two formant contributions. Let's listen to this sample. This is a Voce Vista file of the vowels whispered I, E, A, O, O, U in a chiaroscuro manner. What you're seeing is frequency on the vertical. This lower bright band is the first undervowel contribution, the first formant contribution. That second higher band is the overvowel or second formant contribution. And these higher bands are singer's formant cluster. Let's listen to that one more time very quickly. Here I've filtered out that undervowel first formant contribution. Since it is isolated, you will hear it in its pure form, which is in the oo spectral tone color area. When we get to the o and the oo, those you will hear fairly clearly because that is the target intended timbre for those vowels. That signal is a little bit faint. Let's hear it one more time. And here I filtered out the second formant, the overvowel contribution. When we get to the O and the U, you will not be hearing the target vowel tone color. You'll be hearing the complementary O for those two vowels. And one more time. And then finally, the singer's formant cluster, which will be a lot of high, bright, hissy E tone color. Hearing the whole thing again, see if you can hear the duet between the first and second formants. Here we go. When you get to the A-O-O-U, the formants are so close together that the brain tends to meld them into one thing and you cease hearing them as a duet. So, what are the uses of the counterscrotal whisper? You can model ideal resonator positions per vowel for normal vowel tuning, which is the tuning that you want to use for passive vowel migration. But you can also rehearse ideal shape changes for active vowel modification. And very briefly, you can do this by maintaining the second formant or overvowel auditory target. It has a particular vowel and pitch while raising the first formant by mouth opening. Here's an example. I maintained that E target while opening the mouth. Opening the mouth raises the first formant. For more detailed information and a demonstration of this, you can see my website, kenbozeman.com. This is a free downloadable counterscrotal whisper vowel modeling, or I've written about this extensively in Kinesthetic Voice Pedagogy 2, the second edition of that book. So, what are the necessary migrations? Well, nothing stays exactly the same across range. Vowel color migrates, Every step of the scale migrates a little. As you're changing pitch, you're changing your paint set, and the change in the percentage of over and under vowel contributions is changing. Acoustic register migrations are particularly strong. Every time a source harmonic crosses the first resonance, you will hear a migration. Particularly the change from open to close timbre and from close to whoop timbre are especially strong migrations. Vibratory sensations and locations migrate across range. From low, we have a sort of an oral, frontal, more hard palate vibration. As we go higher, we get a more vertical, internalized sensation above and below the mouth. I've charted that with this sort of epsilon figure here. When you're low in the range, you're feeling more this middle leg of the epsilon vibrating in the mouth and out. And as you go higher, there's more of a verticalizing of that sensation, both above and below the mouth. And also, there's an eventual reduction of vibratory sensation as you approach 1,000 hertz, as I explained from Chadley Ballantyne's work. Auditory roughness, or the relative smoothness or buzziness, migrates from a very coarse buzz, low in the range, to a smoother sizzle, to eventually a high, pure timbre. And affect both migrates and motivates pitch change. Melodic expression basically is motivated by expression. In other words, melodic notation is, in a sense, a kind of choreography for expression. It's like a choreographic notation for expression. So affect migrates and motivates pitch change. I encourage you to play with different affects to find which ones are best suited to motivate different range effects. Paradoxically, all of these necessary migrations, honoring these necessary migrations, which are changes of timbre, facilitates continuity and consistency and efficiency. So in a sense, honoring change facilitates a certain kind of sameness or timbral unity. I'm going to play some examples now of singers in the migrations of range. Here is a tenor doing a passive migration of an ah vowel. Oops, excuse me. Here we go. You will notice he does not change his shape, but you will hear the voice go from open timbre to close timbre as his voice turns over in this ah. Notice an increase in the ah, the complementary tone color, as it closes into close timbre. Oh, excuse me. Was a junior student in my studio, a junior baritone doing an ah migration. Notice also the increase in auditory roughness as he gets lower in the range and more harmonics drop below his first resonance. Using a little bit of change of affect to increase the auditory roughness low in the range, which is useful. Here he's doing a passive migration on an O vowel, which he sets up prior to singing with a caudoscotal whisper. The caudoscotal whisper of that close O vowel will be at the pitch A5, and then he starts singing on A3. and the vowel will immediately turn over into closed timbre by the B3. This is a tenor that I trained in the 90s who's now singing at the Malmö Opera in Sweden. In fact, he recently received the UC Björling prize there. Anyway, he's singing a very high, high B flat in C on an I vowel, which is using active vowel modification. He's opening that I, keeping his tongue dorsum very high to make an I vowel, live, on a very long passage. There's also an interesting phenomenon when he diminuendos on an E vowel. You will hear the spectral slope gradually changing as you do a diminuendo, which features more and more the undervowel component of the E vowel. The camera goes back and forth, but you'll get enough close-ups to see what he's doing. There was a lot of undervowel in that final soft E vowel, B, E, which softer sound features the low end of the spectrum, and you hear more of the undervowel. Now, moving to some treble voices, here's a mezzo. This was her senior year in my studio, doing a passive migration on the vowel O. She starts in whoop timbre on C5, and then migrates down to through closed timbre, and eventually into some chest mix for the lower notes. All these are basically passive migrations. When she's in more open timbre, that open timbre auditory roughness plus the transition laryngally causes us to hear that particular register change, which is sort of a double change, both laryngeal and acoustic. Here she is on an A vowel. Very clearly you will hear it enter whoop timbre at about E, E flat 5. So as habilitators and trainers, we need to be able to hear these transitions. They're evidence, for example, that she's leaving the throat more the same and not responding with throat closure or something I don't want to be happening. Here she is doing an ah vowel. Now this is mostly passive, but on the highest notes, in order to track whoop timbre that high, she will open a bit more for the very highest notes. So again, you'll be able to hear whoop timbre come in, as well as open timbre low. There's whoop timbre on that top note. Notice in that last pass, the second note is very subtle, goes from open timbre to close timbre, and that's. Let me just play that again. Here is a soprano actively modifying an E vowel, which has to be opened rather early in the treble voice range because the E first resonance sits at the bottom of the treble clef. As soon as you're up into the treble clef at all, you need to start opening the E vowel for a maximum fullness of timbre for classical. So she's doing what I suggested with the chiaroscuro whisper, opening the mouth but keeping the tongue dorsum high enough to create that E component in the timbral sound. Last two slides, I have a mezzo that was a music educator that wanted to be able to train tenors and to be able to train the tenor passaggio. She loved the aria Una furtiva lagrima and asked if she could sing it at tenor pitch so that she could train her lower passaggio like the tenor's upper passaggio. So we had two short lessons on this, and then we recorded this, and basically making sure that there's enough auditory roughness to be perceived as essentially some sort of chest mix in classical timbral balance. So I think it's useful to hear. You can train treble voices down there, that passaggio, that lower passaggio, just like the upper passaggio of non-treble voices. So she's using all of the same migrations and adjustments that I would have a tenor do at those pitches. the second verse, which has some other vowel migrations. What I want you to listen for is see if you can hear both the target vowel and the complementary vowel. For an E is E, for an U is O, O, and so forth. For an A it's A. So you'll maybe be able to hear some of those in this pass. Okay. So, conclusions are acoustic registers are real. It's really useful to know about them and how they interact with the laryngeal registration. Their locations are predictable by vowel and voice type. They mimic and interact with the two primary laryngeal registers. If you use the acoustic registers well, that will help laryngeal registration. Furthermore, honoring the necessary migrations of timbre and somatosense across range, the migrations of vowel from the target to the complementary tone colors, auditory roughness from a buzzy low to a purer high, acoustic register from open timbre to closed timbre to whoop timbre, and somatosensation, where you feel it and what you can feel and how much you can feel across range. All of those facilitate dynamic, efficient laryngeal registration and function. Not honoring them inhibits efficient laryngeal registration. So that concludes my talk, and I hope that there are some questions that you might have. If you want to explore these topics further, I've written about them in several places, as have others. These are a couple of things that I've written that you could explore as well. So I will stop my share now and wait to see if there are any questions.
Ken, thank you so much for such an incredible presentation. You know, every time I watch one of your online lectures, I thank God that they're being pre-recorded, that they're being recorded at the time, because I just know, just watching that there, that I'm going to need to go back and just watch some of that again and retake and reprocess a lot of that information, because it's just so incredibly rich with information. And so thank you so much for sharing that with both myself and, of course, the BVA and Choice for Voice delegation.
My pleasure.
We have had a few questions come in. I'm going to go to this one from Polina Prutzikova. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Polina. So this question came in during the slide when we were watching the baritone passive migration on the O vowel.
Okay.
And she says, what happens to the tongue? Do you have to keep it still?
I believe in passive migration that the shape can stay essentially the same as it migrates. Now, what it feels like is another matter, because we know that sometimes perception and reality aren't the same thing. But in fact, if you've shaped a close O, and you can get, actually, if you check out those videos that I've posted, that list of resources on chiaroscuro whisper, the pitch of a close O is A5 in a chiaroscuro whisper. If you set that up and leave it there, those acoustic registers will change as you just ascend the scale. The reason that I posit that it stays basically the same is if you change the shape, you'll be moving the formant. And if you want to leave those resonances where they are and just let the harmonics move through them, you don't want to change the shape, at least not, perceptibly, very, very minimally. So I would say that the shape can stay the same. Now, that said, there are various approaches and various things that singers can do that might work. So this may not be the only way to get at it, but I find it to be a very effective way.
Thank you, Ken. And just reacting to what you were saying about the chiaroscuro whisper there, we had another question come in from Mary at Borg, who says, thank you so much for an interesting talk. I will definitely need to watch it back. Can you explain further on how you use the chiaro whisper with your students and what it can help the singer achieve?
Well, the students' natural instincts, which is typical in the wild, right, in nature, is to cheat towards the high spectral content. We do that when we whisper normally, and we do that when we yell. So we tend to go, yay, yah, and it causes us to narrow the pharynx and raise the larynx, and it can lead to a little bit more of a pressing of the phonation. The chiaroscuro whisper sets you up for an ideal balance of the over and under vowels. Yay, or if I do a yay, yah, yah. Notice when I chiaroscuro whisper an ah, you hear a lot of that undervowel color. Yah, ah, yah. Instead of yah, yah, yah. If I do yah, you know what I did. You can tell I really raised the first formant by narrowing the pharynx and raising the larynx. So it can set up the voice for best resonation for a vowel, and that's the best posture for passive migrations. The other main use is for active vowel modification, which I really love. If you listen to my material, you will see that these vowels have particular pitches. If I do, and the better you do the chiaroscuro whisper, the more cleanly tuned the over vowel pitch will be. And it will be, perhaps you could hear, say I need to actively modify for a treble voice an A vowel. There's my target. As long as I keep that sound there as I open my mouth, there will be some A tone color in the resultant sound. So it goes like this. I'm going to open my mouth, trying to stay very comfortable behind and use expression. You still hear that pitch and that vowel? That is actually the active modification for a high note on an A vowel, for example. You can do that with all the vowels once you know the pitches of them and learn how to do the chiaroscuro whisper, which is actually a skill that has to be rehearsed. It is not instinctive. The sensation of that whisper is much more internal, less mouthy. Typically, your student will want to go mouthy, and they will want to hear the target vowel dominate, and not the complementary. There's a lot of in that chiaroscuro whisper, but that's the balanced position.
Fascinating, Ken. And so when you're teaching that, are you focusing, like with the specific student in the room, are you focusing, getting them to focus on the shape in the vocal tract, the pharyngeal shape, or are you thinking more kind of perceived tone?
So I use primarily the way we motivate voicing, which is expression and auditory targets, to some extent somatosensory sensations, not biomechanics. I can do the biomechanics, I can talk about them, and sometimes I need to, but rather than saying, okay, put your tongue here, put your teeth here, put your jaw there, I say, here's your auditory target. Can you do that in a way that feels absolutely soothing to your neck and expressive, like with warm-hearted empathy? Can you do this for an A vowel? Can you match that? Using that auditory target leads you to the right biomechanics. without thinking, okay, you got it. Well, I can tell them with the E, the tongue dorsum has to be really high. It's probably be touching the upper molars on either side, very near the roof of the mouth, especially as you actively modify and open your mouth. They will tend to do this if you're doing an E vowel. And say, okay, open your mouth more. They'll go, well, they lost the auditory target. The tongue dorsum will have to stay very high. And by the way, all of these voice teachers will notice that my tongue tip did not make it all the way to my lower teeth as I did that modification. As long as the tongue is free, that is unnecessary for that radical of a vowel modification. Most vowels, for most situations, they will reach the lower teeth, which is sort of standard pedagogy. We don't want to be actively pulling it back and retracting it, but I don't have to. That actually makes it less comfortable here. You need to open an E vowel more than any vowel, really. Your E vowel at the top of the treble clef should be more open than your open-mouthed than your A vowel in order to be balanced, which is very paradoxical from our speech level. So when I would sing Maria in West Side Story, I would sing Maria, not Maria. Maria, 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 up high.
Mm-hmm.
And treble voices really need to open an E vowel, and to get them to do that with their tongue dorsum high enough is a challenge. It will feel like their tongue is in the way, like they're singing through tongue, even under the tongue. I learned from a colleague in Sweden that the Italians some say that. I didn't know that, but I was very pleased to learn that. I said, I feel like you're singing under your tongue. She said, oh, the Italians say, cantare sotto la lingua, sing under your tongue, when you have that. Because if you sing over your tongue and out your mouth, that raises the larynx. Sort of serious. Anyway, so I use the Kaleidoscope whisper in those ways. It trains awareness of how I'm shaping what it feels like. The Kaleidoscope whisper, by the way, should be the most soothing, comfortable way possible to whisper. Typical whispering is mildly stressing.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Ken. We do have one question. I think you've kind of given us a real insight there into how you're approaching your teaching by focusing, not as much as you were saying on kind of the anatomical side of things in certain ways. But we had a question from Carol Glaister, who, just to condense her question a little bit, because I think you've addressed some of it already in your answers to other questions, but she says, do you use visual feedback with spectrograms in your studio at all? Obviously, that plays a role in your presentations and your research. I wondered if you use it hands-on with singers.
So when I was at the university and I had the studio set up there, Voce Vista Video Pro was running over my shoulder constantly in the lesson. But I rarely referred to it and I rarely used it. And I didn't talk to the students in the lessons in science-y terminology. I talked more in terms of motivational, auditory targets, sensations. Frankly, I used the mirror in the room a lot more than the Voce Vista Video Pro. I would occasionally, if there was something, I used it primarily for my sound playback device, my audio playback. If I wanted them to hear something they just did, I would play it back and there would be a picture that I could possibly refer to show them some things. But my feeling is if you can't teach a voice lesson well without technology, you won't be able to teach a voice lesson well with technology. Now, if you do know technology, there are moments where it can be very efficient and actually end a discussion or end resistance to something. You play something back, you show them the picture, a little hard to argue with that level of fact, but it was not prominent in my pedagogy. And now online, I'm just teaching online, face-to-face. But I am informed by what I learned from all of that technology, and I know the auditory targets, I know the acoustic targets from having worked with all of that information. So some people do use it very effectively. Many don't, surprisingly, that you would think that are capable of using it, don't, because they find, no, I'm going to keep this a little bit more like traditional human interactions, but I know what I'm after acoustically, and I can record it in playback if I want.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ken. And just a question from me as a voice teacher, and also a question that I hope I think many voice teachers in the audience will want to know, given how closely you work with acoustics and sounds and things like that, how have you found that transition? You mentioned there working online, of course, the compressed sound through Zoom and various different aspects about how good someone's connection is and things like that. How have you found that that's hampered your teaching, and what strategies have you put in place to kind of work around that, if anything?
Of course, you need to have decent audio transmission, and it seems to be even more challenging with high singing, high treble voices. But assuming you've got an application that's allowing reasonably good transmission of the entire sound, it's been working surprisingly well. The other reason is this: I use my eyes maybe as much as I use my ears in assessing what a student is doing. And so putting those two together, even when the sound transmission is maybe not ideal, I often can tell what they're doing by what it looks like. And then I always ask, how did that feel physically? Was that comfortable? What were you feeling for that feedback? So I've been very pleased and surprised with how well lessons have been able to work via transmission like this. I mean, I still miss being in the room with the person and having that human interaction and so forth, and I long for the day that we can do that more. But it's enabled me to then reach out and teach people all over the world, which has been very interesting and fun in different ways. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ken. And so just two questions we have to finish off today. One's coming from Richard Edgar Wilson. It was towards the beginning of your presentation when you were talking about yawn and opposite of yawn. Richard writes, yawn is quite easy to visualize or physicalize, and yet opposite of yawn is perhaps more tricky. Could you describe more about the terminology that you might use or the approaches that you might use?
Right, and that's a very good question. Obviously, the yawn feels like you're opening the throat. That's a kinesthetic lie that your body is playing on you. It does raise the palate and lower the larynx. It does those two things, but it pulls the tongue down into the laryngopharynx. So it's actually, the tongue bulging near the back wall is actually narrowing the throat. Now, obviously, I don't, when I say this concentrated acoustic sensation, I don't literally want to be constricting the throat, but this feeling here is actually not helpful. This feeling here, yeah. Actually use an affect of, and usually you can find an affect that gives you that more collected ringing sensation in your oropharynx and your pharynx in general, and it's an acoustic sensation. Sometimes it's hard to sort acoustic from physical or from muscular sensation or shape sensation, but it's affectively collected. So if I do, for example, toddler complaint, this is going to be a tool I use that has some nasality to it. When I do that, if I do a genuine complaint, I get a robust signal with a fairly shallow spectral slope. So it's got a lot of rich harmonic content, but feels really comfortable to do. That toddler can do that way too long, right? But it feels more, this does not feel yawny at all. No, they don't do that. They know they want a lot of high spectral content, which has a greater potential of annoying the parent to do what they want, right? So they feel that, right? But you feel like the buzziness of the sound sort of in the middle, near the tongue dorsum, the tongue hump, or to just behind there, rather than yawny, hollow in the back. It doesn't feel hollow. It feels like the space is all painted in with ring. So these are subjective sensations, yes, but let's face it, singing is an utterly subjective process. We have to use the subjective carefully and cleverly.
Thank you, Ken. I'm just smiling now, thinking of how many of our delegates at home will be yawning and whining right now to try and feel those sensations. If I knew that I wasn't obviously on camera here, I'd have been doing that myself. But to finish off today, we have, so Paulina has come back to us. You'll recall she asked the question regarding the tongue just earlier today. And she said, if I or my student can't hear the secondary vowel, can you recommend any tools/gadgets that can make them better audible?
Well, of course, you can do what I did with the Voce Vista Video Pro. You can actually record it and isolate it and hear it. But if you do, what you want to do, if it's the undervowel, which it usually is, the complementary vowels, which he's asking about, you want to do a sound that prioritizes lower timbre. An ingressive glottal click, even an egressive glottal click, inhalatory or exhalatory. We'll do it a little bit. I'll try to show you. If I do I'm ingressively. Closing the glottis, thumping the side of the throat will do it. Takes a little bit of practice. So you're hearing the pitch of those and sort of the timbre. That's a noise, so it plays the whole vocal tract, but it's playing the lower end of the spectrum a little more than the higher end. Whereas if I do a and really concentrate on that, I'm able to hear the lower end. I don't know if that's just because I've trained myself to, or if you're able to hear that on your end, but if I use the then you begin to hear that duet. You begin to be aware of it. Oh, yeah, there are these two components to those vowels. And I've been cheating and only doing the higher one. Very mouthy and spread, so-called spread, instead of this more balanced, rich, deeper timbre. Now we use that, you can do a variety of things, obviously, for various genres, and you can choose what sound you want for the genre, but then you know how you're doing it better. You're better able to feature more of this or more of that to fit the genre that you're singing in.
Great. Thank you, Ken, for that clarification. And of course, if our delegates at home haven't quite had enough Ken Bozeman in their lives, we also at the BVA, about a year ago now, we recorded a episode of Keynote Conversations with yourself and David Howard, didn't we? Which is produced some fascinating results, a really sort of insightful hour of content. And for our members, so if you're a BVA member, you can actually access that by going on the BVA website and signing into our members only section, and you can find that on there. And of course, if you're a Choice for Voice delegate that isn't a BVA member, you can find some information about joining in the resources page of the Choice for Voice platform. But for now, Ken, that's all the time we have, of course. When you were saying about wanting to see some students in person and wanting to get back to that, it did make me slightly saddened that, of course, you weren't joining us at Leeds Conservatoire, which was the original plan, of course, with this conference. But I do feel deeply privileged to have still been able to share this platform with you here virtually. And so thank you so much for giving up your time, expertise, and knowledge throughout all the changes that we've obviously gone through with this conference over the past sort of 2 years. It's been an absolute delight to host you, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Wonderful. So to all of our delegates at home, that is the end of day 2, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow for another jam-packed day of papers, lectures, and presentations. We have 2 keynote presentations tomorrow, one from Christina Schul and then one from Janice Chapman. We also have the Von Lawrence Award, the BVA AGM for those of you that are members, and plenty more fantastic content. So have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you soon.